So I'm joined up here by several distinguished guests. I want to make sure I get everybody's official titles right. So from my left, actually I should start on this side. This is Ms. Raven Hart Belcourt, who is the female rep on the Aboriginal Student Council here at the University of Winnipeg. Everybody welcome her. This is Ms. Leah LaPlante, who is a former Minister of Education with the Manitoba Metis Federation and is the chair of the Louis Riel, former chair of the Louis Riel Institute. Current member of the Indigenous Advisory Circle. To her left is Ms.Diane Roussion, who's the Executive Director of Mawi Itata Center, better known as Mawi. And then to her left is Ms. Jennifer Rattray, who's the Associate Vice President of Indigenous Government and Community Affairs here at the University of Winnipeg. And to her left, no, let's go all the way around the circle. So I thought we could begin the discussion with maybe first getting a sense of where we're at today. And I think maybe one of the best ways to get at that is to just have our panelists reflect on Indigenous education today, and in particular to speak to what are the successes and what are the failures or what are the challenges that still exist with regards to Indigenous education. So I will randomly select Raven to go first.
Roussion, Wabashke Kinew Kanichihk, Makwadu Dame, Gawa Kabi Kanichihk and Dunjiba. I think that I decided to come here to the University of Winnipeg. The whole idea for me to come here was to pursue 2 years of pre-law. That was what I decided to do when I wanted to come here. But when I came here and I realized how much support that the University of Winnipeg offers its students, Indigenous students, I decided to stay and pursue 2 degrees. So right now I'm working on an Indigenous Studies degree and a conflict resolution degree, with the goal of still going to law school. So one of the things that really stood out to me was how many of my professors were Aboriginal or Indigenous descent. I've never seen so many Indigenous professors anywhere in my whole K-12 and my whole 3-year education at Red River College. I've never seen so many professors that were Indigenous, and that really appealed to me. I was like, wow, like what great role models, what a great way to spend my education, and I think I'm gonna stick around a little bit longer and see what I'm gonna, what I'm gonna be learning here. And I just, there's one thing that I realized as a mother of 3 and a single mother, is that I'm gonna need a lot of support through this. And, I'm sure that I've knocked on doors and bugged at the last minute, but there was always somebody there to help me in whatever I needed. And so if I could say that that is a success, that's one of the successes that I'm seeing as a University of Winnipeg Aboriginal woman. Coming as a mature student, there's so much support. If I could say that there was a barrier to my education, I think one of the things that we're lacking in the University of Winnipeg and in post-secondary education, and actually in education all over the city, whether that's K-12 college, is cultural education. Because in order for us to know, where we're going in life, we also need to know where we come from. And I think that should be the first education we learn when we come to the university, is about our way of life, about our lodges, about our traditional foods and medicines. And I can just imagine how much support our students would have if they had that. And there is some of that, but I think we could be doing so much better. And I think that that's not just department responsibility of this department or that department. I think it's all of our responsibility to provide that education. Because if you are in trouble and you end up going to jail, that's one of the first things that's offered there. So why shouldn't we offer it in our institution? You know, I would really love to see, you know, a medicinal garden on campus. I would really love to see a sweat lodge on campus. One of the dreams that I have here as Indigenous leadership, like student leadership, is having a traveling classroom. And my idea of that is having a teepee, because we could take it anywhere. We could put it on the front lawn. We could put it up in Birds Hill, you know, and we could have, you know, our classes there. And I think that knowing our connection to the land and recognizing that that is education as well is really important, and I'd like to see more of that. I know that a lot of our students that come here from their communities are missing that connection to the land, and they're missing that connection to our way of life. And a lot of our students that come here have never had any connection to their culture. But can you imagine if we have that as a structure to build on, how powerful and how amazing and how, you know, how successful we'll be as students? I know that that would be a main support for me to stay here. That's what I need as an Aboriginal woman, is to have that cultural component, to be able to know how to start the day in a good way, to have that smudging ceremony. We do a lot of smudging on campus, but I think that we could take it one step further and have, you know, more ceremonies on campus and have Indigenous knowledge keepers come and share with us women's teachings and men's teachings. We really need that strong foundation. So I'll start with that. Gwech.
Again. Leah, can you reflect on what you consider to be the successes and failures around Indigenous education today?
Yes, I can. I was the Minister of Education for the MMF from 2003 until the end of 2012. And I've seen a lot of transitions happening over those 9 years. So just to start with some of the successes, I was privileged to be the minister through all of the years that the MMF started putting money into universities under the Louis Riel scholarships and bursaries. And the total amount to date is $14 million in trust in all of the universities in Manitoba. And the interest from that money is used to give out scholarships and bursaries, and it's made a big difference. We have had 2,725 Métis students applying for these scholarships and bursaries, and 1,444 were successful in getting them. And I know from getting letters from these students, in a lot of cases it made the difference as to whether they could stay in university or not, because a lot of them are single parent families, and so that has changed the circumstance quite a bit. We also, President Chartrand and the minister in the Assets program were successful a few years ago in convincing the federal funders to allow us to fund last year university, which has made a big difference to a lot of students. And from, just as an example, from 2010 to present day, 1,369 Métis post-secondary students were funded through that program. So, you know, really that is a very big success story. It's just the tip of the iceberg. As the minister, I was privileged to attend a conference of, I think it was 23 or 24 universities from across North America. And I sat the first day and listened, as I always like to do. First listen and then make a comment on what you're hearing. And one of the things that I noticed as a Métis person, well, as an Aboriginal person, is that the people that were talking about how to fix the problem of low numbers for Aboriginal people in post-secondary didn't have a clue who we were as Aboriginal people. They were misusing the terms, you know, Aboriginal, speaking as if it was simply First Nations, and they were mixing it up, and I thought, okay, like, I'm not university educated, but I'm starting to wonder, how can they help us fix our problem when they don't even know who we are as Aboriginal people? So on the second day, I couldn't help myself. I had to get up and say that. And this is what I said. You know, the world we live in is just starting to have respect for Indigenous knowledge. But for all of you educators in this room, all you have to do is ask us, ask the Aboriginal people what it's going to take to have better numbers of people in post-secondary education. And I still believe that. And I would like to say, not just because I'm sitting at the U of W, but I want to publicly thank Lloyd Axworthy, who I think is one of the leaders in Canada when it comes to looking at new and innovative ways of helping Aboriginal people get an opportunity for a post-secondary education. And those are some of the success stories, because they're starting to ask us to sit on committees. What do you think? What do you think it would take to get your people educated? And I just want to share a personal story. I had the opportunity in Brandon, at Brandon University, to go speak to a class of young people who were taking education. And, you know, sitting there, being an older person now, looking at all of these young people who were so excited about becoming teachers, I thought I should share a little bit of my personal story with them to perhaps give them a different insight for those who are going to be teaching our children and our grandchildren. And I shared with them that I came from a family of 10 in a little Métis community way down south, almost on the American border. And by grade 6, I had left our little Métis community where our little school was because our house had burnt down. We moved to the closest town. I was in grade 6, and within 3 months of starting school there, I was on nerve medication to stay in school. And I don't have to tell you all why. That story is familiar enough. But I had such a thirst for knowledge. They couldn't kill that in me. They couldn't stop it. And I graduated in the same town where that happened. The next 7 of my siblings dropped out in grade 9, grade 10, grade 11. And the 8th one in the family, the 9th one, finally graduated. So 2 out of 10 graduated, which would leave a lot of people in that little town and elsewhere to think that Aboriginal people aren't as smart as everybody else. But as time proved differently, those other 7 siblings all went on to get a post-secondary education in one form or another. I have a nurse, a sister who's a nurse. I have a sister who's a second-class power engineer. I have a sister who's a carpenter. My brothers all own their own business. So it just proves that the fact that Aboriginals do not have high percentages is not because they can't learn. We are some of the most intelligent, I feel, I'm biased however, I feel we're some of the most intelligent people around because we've had to become very resourceful. So I shared with those soon-to-be teachers, you know, you have learned everything in the university that you needed to learn to become a good teacher. You're almost ready to graduate. But what you need to know is you're going in, I'm betting, with an understanding, or what you believe to be an understanding, that Aboriginal people are down here on a scale of their ability to learn, and you and all of your friends are up here. And I said, that's the first mistake you're going to make as a teacher, because I challenge you to walk into your classroom and take every student, whether they're Aboriginal or not, and treat them as if they are the person that you are going to give an education to, and they have everything they need to make that happen. They just need you to believe in them. So you need to learn the history of Manitoba and Canada. You need to know the whole story of the Aboriginal, from the residential school to the way the Métis were treated, and you need to understand that we are where we are, not because we are not worthy people, it's because the circumstance this country put us in. And if you can do that, then you will earn every paycheck you take home. as a teacher. And that's the message I have. It isn't as easy as putting scholarships and bursaries out there for our kids. This has to start from the time they're born, and when they go into kindergarten, they need teachers who believe that they can be doctors and lawyers or anything they want to be. Because I had an English teacher who believed in me, and she is the one that encouraged me to stay in school, and I graduated from grade 12, and almost every day I thank that woman for what she did to me. So it only takes one educator to make a difference in somebody's life, and that is how we're going to change these statistics. It isn't going to happen overnight. So that's my answer to increasing post-secondary education for Métis students, and I'm certain for all Indigenous students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, maybe we'll continue with the rest of the panel. So Diane, do you want to share your take on what the successes and failures are regarding Indigenous education?
Well, and again, I agree with the previous two panelists, and Leah pretty much said all of what I wanted to say. So I agree wholeheartedly.
All right, thanks for coming out, everybody. We'll see you guys in 100 convocations from now.
So I look around and I get to spend almost all my time, so all my work time and all my home time on a everyday basis with some very, and it's primarily women. I'm a social worker by trade, and so we're doing some social work stuff, and so I tend to be surrounded by a lot of strong, bossy Indigenous women, and the bossier the better, as far as I'm concerned. And so there's a lot of strength out there, and there's a lot of resiliency out there, and again, I just feel so lucky that I get to be surrounded by that all day long for the most part. And so there's a real strength out there in that. So I don't know if that's a success of the system or not, but we're here. and as I go about from this committee to that committee, or from this circle to that circle, I see more and more of us in those circles, and so that's a good. There needs to be way more of us in more of those circles, but we're starting to be in those circles, and so. There's a lot of decisions that get made, and there's a lot of conversation that happens in those circles, and there's a lot of understanding that happens in those circles, and unless Indigenous people are in those circles, there's just a real missed opportunity there for understanding. I think that we're starting to see some stuff in curriculum, and we're starting to see some stuff in the educational institutions, and I agree with you, it starts from pre-birth, prenatal years all the way up to TOOM, I think is what we were talking about earlier, that sort of Indigenous ways of knowing and being need to be just permeated throughout all of our learning systems. And I tend to take a broader sort of understanding of learning. I just think it happens in all these different ways. So we're starting to make strides with indigenizing curriculum, but I think we've got a lot longer, or a lot further to go. And I think the post-secondaries are doing a fairly good job of that. Again, always more to go, and I think our public schools, so we were just having a discussion earlier that our public school systems probably have a lot further to go as far as educating about the accurate history of Canada, so what's been our textbooks, what's in our, what's being taught in our classrooms isn't necessarily a full reflection of Canada's full history, and I know there's a lot of people in this circle that are working at that every day, trying to get the other perspectives of that history out there, so that we know there isn't just a single history there, but there's multiple experiences in that history. And I think that, and sort of to Raven's point, there is sort of mainstream concepts of history, but I also think that there really needs to be a grounding in that Indigenous ways of knowing and being, which is I once heard an elder say, well, you hear people say we have to think outside the box. You hear that all the time. But I heard an elder say one time that we need to think inside the circle. And I think that's what we need to do more of, which means it's a circle first, not a box that you're trying to tinker with, but it's a circle first. And that's where knowledge needs to flow from. And so, pre-contact, there still is, pretty rich knowledge systems there. And I think they tend to be more oral, and so they don't get written down as much, and then they don't get researched as much, and then they don't get held up as a body of knowledge as much. So I'm starting to hear some, and this is new for me anyway, starting to hear some more discussion about how we place value on, say, even oral histories and oral traditions. Does it mean we have to write it down? I don't know. But how do you place value on it? And so I know that I do work all across this, I do some work in education, but I also do work in the early years, and I do work with teenagers, and I do work with seniors. And so often what gets funded is evidence-based stuff, which drives me up the wall, because we know some things, but we don't have it researched, and we don't have it, 25-year data sets on it or whatever. But we intuitively know, like when we do our ceremony, we know what happens when people come out of that sweat lodge. We can see it. When people come out of ceremony, we can see what happens. So, but it's not necessarily evidence-based, because it's not placed in a certain kind of knowledge system, and it's not given a value. So I think we need to make some more strides in that. But I think that knowledge and everything, it's there. We have it, and it's it's in all these people sitting in this circle. And so I see those people, whether it's in social work or education or justice or anywhere, we are all over the place, and I feel like we're all saying the same thing. And that's the other piece. There's such an agreement and a consensus on this. I know, again, I sit on 10,000 committees with lots of you that are in this circle, and we're saying the same thing. Like, it's just repeat. And Leah and I were just talking about, if you say something over and over again enough, then it becomes reality, right? You just got to speak it into existence. So I'm really glad to see my colleagues in all these different circles, and we gravitate towards each other, and we tend to gang up with each other, and we just try to, make sure that our voices are heard. There's a person that I spent some time with last year, and he said, the failure to know the truth of our history clouds our understanding of the present. And so that just, again, speaks to the need for accurate kinds of curriculum, or at least having other perspectives in curriculum and in education. So we need to do more on that.
Okay, miigwech. And Jennifer, successes, failures.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming out. I'm amazed by the number of people here, and I'm so grateful and so thankful that each and every one of you have taken time out of your day to come and to sit and to be here. I'm really inspired by that, so thank you all. Like I say, so much for being here. I do want to take 30 seconds just to jump back. I first walked onto a university campus almost 30 years ago. In 1984, and at another university, I should say. And I was in an English class, and the professor, there were two Indigenous women in the class, two Indigenous people in this very small class, and one of them was very visibly First Nations, and then there's me, part First Nations, part Scottish Canadian, not always so visible. And the professor said to my friend in the class, my new friend in the class, what are you doing in this class? Squaws don't sit in my class. What are you doing here? You must be mistaken. I think, you should leave. And I'm not kidding. No word of a lie. And that was her introduction to university, at another university. So I just think of how much things have changed, and I should indicate this professor was not using squaw in the beautiful way to mean woman. He was using squaw in a negative, derogatory way, and I just think, and she was very upset by that, and we talked it through, and she stayed in the class, and lost track of her after that, but I hope she stayed with university education. But all that to say is it's changed so much in the 30 years since I first walked onto a university campus, and so much at the University of Winnipeg is due to the people who are in this circle and who are all working so hard together to move things forward. Just very briefly, when I think about successes, I think the fact that we have approximately 12% of our student body self-identifying as First Nations or Métis, a few Inuit, but mostly First Nations and Métis. I think that's amazing. I think of the beautiful work that is done at the Aboriginal Student Services Centre. We have Andy here, we have Randy, we have Tim, who's newly joined the team. There you are. And just the very holistic way that they look at students, and that they see the whole student, and they see the student not just as having academic needs, but having financial needs, social needs, spiritual needs, cultural needs, and then they work with those students to figure out if there's a problem or an issue that comes up through the year, how to support that student. So Andy's giving students alarm clocks and diapers for their babies when they run out, and all of that stuff that is part of who we are, and we all have crazy, busy, sometimes messy lives, and so I just think of how far things have come and how much has changed, and I think definitely of that as one of the successes. I think of barriers like housing and daycare, and I think of the work that Sherman has done and his team to work on those issues, to make sure that that Indigenous students and all students are able to come to university, have affordable housing, get their child into daycare, so that they can come and get a university education if that's what they decide to do, and obviously all under the leadership of our fearless leader, Dr. Axworthy. So I do want to note the holistic approach that I see really working here over the last 9 years that I've been here. I think the biggest issue, though, when we think about education, if we think about it in a holistic way, the biggest issue is the graduation gap for me, because so few of our young people, so few Indigenous youth are graduating from high school, that obviously decreases the pool that can go on to get a post-secondary education, whether it's college, whether it's university, whatever it is. In this neighborhood, 46.6% of young people graduate, so more than half do not graduate from high school. In the North End, the numbers are closer to 32% who graduate, so the majority do not graduate. If you live on a First Nation in Manitoba today, you have a 26% chance of graduating from high school. So I think a huge amount of work, as Diane has alluded to, and as Leah's talked about in her experience at the school that she attended when she was in grade 6, I think a huge amount of effort needs to be put in the K-12 system, and I think we've really tried here at the university through the community learning initiatives to work in a holistic way with young people, to support them, to help inspire them, to help keep them excited and motivated, to support teachers in the classroom, to do all of that work so that more of our kids are graduating from high school and then can make the choice to come to the University of Winnipeg or another institution, which we would of course support as well. And I guess finally I would say that I just do want to add that about 40% of children in the Winnipeg School Division, which is the largest school division in Manitoba, about 40% of the children are Aboriginal children, either First Nations or Métis primarily. So I think that obviously some work needs to be done there, because the numbers are increasing. And the final point I'll make is a point that Dr. Axworthy and I have talked a fair bit about over the last few days, is that the gap is actually widening when it comes to post-secondary education attainment. So if we're talking about failures, that would be one of them. That in 1996, the gap between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal was about 15%. Now, in 2013, the gap is 20%. So while more of us are going and getting a post-secondary education, whether it's college or university, the numbers have increased exponentially when it comes to the non-Aboriginal population, which is great. I mean, I want all of us to succeed together, but that gap now has grown from 15% to 20%, and it looks like it's only going to continue to widen. So I think all of the work that we can do related to you know, academic barriers, social, cultural, spiritual, financial, daycare, housing, all of those pieces are so important because those are the only pieces that are going to help turn the numbers around and begin to shrink the gap. Egose.
Miigwech. I think we all want to discuss Indigenous student retention at post-secondary institutions, and that is definitely the priority amongst management at the post-secondary institutions. But I want to throw a little bit of contention into the discussion first, just to make things interesting. Allow me to play devil's advocate. Graduating more Indigenous students presupposes that education in the Western sense is a good thing. 140 years ago, if you were to look at policy on Indians at the time, proposed solutions to the Indian problem, the solution was something like this. Hey, Canada is a country with tremendous natural resource wealth. We've got all these native kids kicking around. Why don't we send them to vocational and training institutions, and they will be the workforce that we need to take care of developing our resource wealth in this country. If you read the Globe and Mail today, or if you listen to the priorities that the federal government announces regarding education, what they're saying is essentially something like this. Hey, Canada is a country with tremendous natural resource wealth, and we've got all these native kids sitting around. So why don't we send them to vocational and trade institutions so that they can be the workforce that we need in order to develop the natural resource wealth of this country. Presumably many things have changed in the last 140 years, but the priorities around funding, particularly with education for Indigenous students, don't appear to have shifted that much. So I'd like to put it to the panelists, is education still a tool of assimilation? And if not, why not? Free for all, whoever wants to go first.
I don't think education is a bad thing at any time. It's the circumstances around that education that we have learned historically has caused a lot of problems. And it goes back to what I said about speaking to those educators to come into the classroom. It isn't us that has to change our perspective on the world. It's our educators that have to change their perspective on our world. And that is to believe when they walk in there, whether it's in kindergarten or grade 6 or second-year university student, those educators have to believe that that person is as of much value as everybody else sitting around. And if you make people believe that they're valuable, and I've practiced this over my life with my own family, with friends, with people that work for me, with people that I've worked for. If you make a person believe that you have high expectations of them, 99 times out of 100 people will rise to the occasion and they will prove you right, that they can do whatever. So a personal comment of mine is when I heard that announcement, I don't believe there's very much difference between Sir John A. and the Prime Minister that we have today in where he's coming from. I think the same idea, I believe, is there, that, you know, take those lazy bums and make them do something to earn a living. It isn't that easy to fix a problem. Because they're coming at it from the wrong perspective. But if you make Indigenous young people believe that they can be a part of this country, contribute to this country, and I see it every day. It's not like we don't have Indigenous young people out there working and paying taxes. You know, that's the first statement I think we all need to make. There are reasons that go back 100 years, 150 years for why some of our young people are in trouble. And I think it is incumbent upon every one of us to start changing that and to start telling young people, you can do this. Because if you make them believe they can, they will do it. So I don't think that we should shy away from having young Indigenous people become the workforce that this country needs, and we all know that that is what we need to happen. We need to change the circumstances in this country to allow them to become the workforce that this country needs.
And do you think that if that goal is realized, that Métis identity would be strengthened, hurt in the process, or it would just not be affected?
Well, I know many educated Métis people, and I consider myself to be one of them. I am much more, I'm able to sit and speak, I'm able to go speak to anyone about the Métis cause or me as a Métis, not because I always could. I can remember doing public speaking in high school. I would vomit at the thought of getting up in front of the class. I mean, that's a fact. But it came from being shunned, being told that I wasn't quite up to par with everybody else. You know, you go through that when you're an Aboriginal person. And I think I was 36 or 37 years old when I started to look into my own genealogy, because I said to my old Métis grandmother one day, "Tell me, Grandma, what does it mean to be a half-breed?" And she said, "Well, I can't really tell you that," she said, "but I know that's what I am." And she said to me, "I am just an old half-breed." So I started researching our genealogy. My grandmother started getting Alzheimer's. And in the 3 years it took me to do a very thorough search of who I was, and I read every book from every community where they had lived. By the time I found out she just wasn't not just an old half-breed, and I tell that story because I still find that very hurtful, that after 76 or 77 years of looking after a family, coming from a family of 15 and looking after her 11 children and all of her grandchildren, she ended her life believing she was just an old half-breed. And her genealogy showed that her father and her grandfathers and her uncles were part of the making of the province of Manitoba, and that we are descended from Cuthbert Grant, who, when I was in grade 6 on nerve medication, we were learning about Cuthbert Grant's fort out by Souris, which is not very far from where I was going to school, and I had no idea that I descended from someone of that stature, right? And neither did my grandma. So the reason I can speak from the heart is because I know where I fit in this country. My grandma didn't, my dad didn't, but I do, and I can guarantee you my kids do, and my grandchildren do, and I feel like I am probably stronger now than I was when I was a young person, and it comes from what you know in here. And that's what's been taken away from our young Indigenous people. They have no heart for who they are because they've been told it isn't a good thing to start with, and a lot of them really don't know where they fit or who they are. So do I believe that having a good education and working hard would make me less of a Métis? Absolutely not. It gives me in here what I need to be a good member of society and be a strong, strong Canadian. That's what I think.
Okay, miigwech. And you'll note that the devaluing of Indigenous identity isn't something preserved in the past. Yesterday in the speech from the throne, the Governor General commented on the strength of the Canadian character, how Europeans came to this land and created a nation where none would have otherwise existed.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I can.
That was October 17th,
Yeah,
2013.
yesterday.
So Diane, do you maybe want to jump in?
Sure,
on,
I can jump
on
in.
The
So
point?
the first thing I want to say is, and this is sort of a way that we need to go forward, is, you know, I always have this conversation about outcomes and intention, and it's never about a bad intent, or at least I have to say, or I have to assume it's never about a bad intention, because everyone wakes up every day with good intentions to do good things in this world, right? So let's just assume that that is true, that everyone has good intentions. It's not about that, it's about the outcomes. So is education intentionally there to assimilate? I don't know. Let's assume that that might not be the intention, but is it the outcome? And I think that if education is a tool for assimilation, it ain't working because we ain't making it through the systems. So, I mean, you know, kids are pushed out before they even hit grade 6. Kids are, like, if you look at our graduation numbers, like even from kindergarten, for God's sakes, there's some very appalling numbers. So if that system is about assimilation, it's not working because we are being pushed out and we're dropping out and we're just not engaging, right? So I think that so where education would be a good thing, I think, goes back to the indigenizing of it. And if we have indigenous sort of curriculums and knowledge bases, that can build stronger identities and that can build stronger individuals. And so I'll tell a little story myself. Mawi Wichita Center had its 25th anniversary, and so we somehow were able to get Dr. Bruce Perry, who's some world-renowned neuroscientist, like I think he's got 10 PhDs or something like that. And so just a really smart guy, and his specialty is around childhood trauma and brain development. And so somehow, I don't know how we did this, but we got him to come and be our keynote at our dinner. And so he did this whole presentation, and he showed slides of the brain and how, the chemicals in the brain and blah, blah, blah. So we were all very fascinated with that. So each of us at the Mawi Wichita Center had a day where we sort of were in charge of hosting him. And so my day, I had to take him down to the Forks where we had our annual powwow. The guy had never been to a powwow. And so he was just enthralled with everything he was seeing. And so I got to sit with him all day long, and again, having never been to a powwow, he was telling me all day long how the drum and the beating of the drum and the rhythm of it and the cadence of it and how that would be creating chemicals in the brain that would actually heal the brain and could heal trauma. And so then he was looking at the dancing and the formation of the dancing and just the way the whole day was set up and all the stuff that we were doing all day long. He could equate that to something that was going on in neuroscience. And so imagine if we had that kind of, and I'm like, yeah, duh. We know what it's like when we're singing. We can just see and feel the healing that's going on, right? I don't need to be a brain scientist to know that, because we know that. But does anybody else know that? I don't even know that. We're not teaching that, right? About what our practices and our ways of knowing and being, how that leads to healthy child development or brain development or all the rest of it. So if that's the kind of stuff that made its way into curriculum, then we've got proud, we have knowledge systems too. And, for kids to be proud and right now, I don't think overall society is giving very good messages to our kids, because I'll tell you, we're losing kids daily because 12-year-olds think life is not worth living and they're killing themselves. That is a reality that we deal with every single day, and it just breaks my heart that we have kids out there who think life's not worth living. That's wrong, right? So
Maybe we could turn it over to Raven. You're a student right now, and you made the decision to pursue post-secondary education. Could you maybe reflect on your decision to do so and to keep doing so, with the question of whether or not Western education furthers the goal of assimilation?
I think that one of the questions that I ask myself every day is, how do I decolonize myself? Because I feel very colonized. And that's a reality that it's really sad for me to deal with. One of the most beneficial parts of my life was moving to Wisconsin as a young child and being introduced to the Oneida Tribal School, because that was my first introduction to culture and to language and to music. And I thought I was Oneida. I had no idea that I was Anishinaabe or Nehio. I thought I was Oneida, and my first introduction to education was going into the longhouses and learning about the rattles and learning about the drums and the dances and learning how to count uskadeg and askaye wiskayak jadak deglu waluuye. My brain was such a sponge that I was so easy to take that all in, and I still remember the language, and it was that introduction to education that made me want to pursue my education. One of the things that I realized too through all of this is that I come from a history of women that are all residential school survivors. From my great-grandmother to my grandmother to my mother. I don't know if you know the movie We Were Children, but that whole movie was written on my mother's life, and it was the true tale and events of her life in residential school. And from her experience, she didn't pursue a university education because of the traumatic events that she went through as a child. I'm the first in my whole family to go to university.
that's a big responsibility. But I know how important it is because I want my children to have that opportunity in life that my mother and my grandmother didn't have. So I always carry that with me. And I know that in a sense, some of the things that we're learning about in university are the same things that I hear in different classrooms, Marx and Weber. I think that there's an opportunity to bring in different theorists and different knowledge from all over the world. And until we start indigenizing education, we are going to be, from my point of view, colonized. We have Aboriginal schools in Winnipeg, Children of the Earth High School, Kanichihk. I'm so grateful for those opportunities for our children. And one of the reasons why I haven't sent my children to those schools is because one of the first things my mom did when she came out of residential school was to learn about who she was. So that is something that I've had my whole life. I've had that knowledge. I know where I come from. I know where I'm going. I know what my responsibility is as an Indigenous woman. But that's one thing that I can carry on to my children. So I know that they always have that support in the education system. So I know that they're going to succeed. But then I see a lot of our kids out there that are struggling every day, even just to get up and go to school, or they're getting up and going to school hungry. And that's a real problem. And I think that we all have more responsibility towards indigenizing education and making those opportunities available to all students from K to 12 to college to university. And I think that that's why I stress the importance of culture as a structure. The first thing that we should be introduced to when we come to university. It should be the first thing that our children are introduced to when they go to nursery and kindergarten. But we do have the Head Start program. Yay, Head Start. I think that's an amazing program because the kids get 3 years of education before they even get to kindergarten. And the education is on our culture and our language. And I'm happy that I was able to be a part of that with Sharon's sister, Diane Redsky, who gave me my first job. And it was a pretty good job for a first job because I got to be an administrative assistant for her. But I do believe that until we indigenize education, we're going to continue to be colonized. And that's something that we need to change. And I want to just close with one thing that I learned from Leslie Spillett. She said when a child goes into any kind of institution, if they don't see something that looks like them, that they can recognize as a part of their culture, it's equal to looking into a mirror and seeing nothing. And that's devastating. So I'll close with that, miigwech.
So Jennifer, what do you say? Are you and I furthering the master plan by working here at the University of Winnipeg?
We are. We're taking over. There's Sharon. She's with us. No, I will be brief because we've had 3 very beautiful speakers answer this question. But I would say that I understand that responsibility, Raven. I'm the first on the First Nations half of my family to graduate from university. And in fact, once I had graduated, my mom decided to go to university. And she took a course a year for 25 years and graduated from this beautiful university in the English department and in women's studies, and graduated with her degree. And she worked, and she was a single mom, raising myself, and I was not easy to raise, and raising my younger sister, who was even harder to raise. And she loved her experience here at this university. So my grandfather was incredibly bright, and he won a scholarship to university back in 1928. But he had to give up his First Nation status if he wanted to leave his community and go to university. So he gave up his status, and he went to Campion College, and then he went to Regina College to try and earn a post-secondary education back in the late 1920s as one of the first First Nations men to do so, which was incredibly difficult. But he did that, and he had to give up part of himself in order to be able to go to a university. So I just think things have changed a lot. The final thing I want to say is that I absolutely believe passionately in education, or I wouldn't be here, but I believe so passionately that nothing breaks the back of poverty, that nothing can help us have the opportunities that we deserve and help us make choices about our lives. If we are able to achieve an education, then we can decolonize ourselves, hopefully during that process, but then we have the ability to decolonize ourselves. We have the ability to make the changes that we want in our families. So I absolutely believe in the power of education, and I don't think anything is going to move us forward more than education, but it does have to be relevant. It does have to be respectful. It doesn't have to be Western. I think that being inclusive and respecting Indigenous worldviews, Indigenous ways of being and knowing, and ways of being and knowing from other parts of the world is so important, that there's not just one worldview, that there are many, and that I think we're all richer when we know many ways of thinking about things, as opposed to just the Western way of thinking about things. Egose.
Well, to balance out that, in my family, I'm the only one who doesn't have a doctoral degree. So
Underachiever.
the Indigenous experience is diverse and varied. But yeah, no, I think if you look especially at the Indigenous Academy, if you will, there's been a lot of scholars like Leanne Simpson, Dale Turner, Tayage Alfred, who have made a strong argument for the role of Indigenous academics to be leaders in the community, to be word warriors, to take the cause of their people forward into the greater society and bring back gains back to the Indigenous community. So yeah, as we heard, if the goal was assimilation, it's kind of backfiring, because some of the most staunch Indigenous nationalists you will find are in the academy. So I'd like to open it up, to anybody who wants to make comments. I think a good place for us to, start talking is how do we boost the retention rate, which is a clinical management way of saying how do we get more Native kids to graduate, of the ones who do come in the door here at the University of Winnipeg. So yeah, I guess I'll be the roving mic, and I'll stop if there's feedback. And please introduce yourself too.
Miigwech. My name is Pejanakut. My Christian name is Clifton James Starr. 2 comments. First of all, I really like your socks, Mr. Kinew. You've inspired me to... that's not a joke. I'm inspired to be more adventurous in my, my fashion. But my more serious comment is that I believe that Indigenous students need freedom to engage in political association and political activities. By doing so, we give them opportunities to develop their skills, to apply the skills that they've acquired in class, and then put it to work for their people, but like in an environment where it's safe, where they have supports that could help guide them to make sure that their politics are practical and respectful. I've seen this work on so many different levels. In 2010, I was part of a student group that hosted a forum on accountability, transparency, and effective leadership in First Nations communities, and all the students who participated were really excited about the next one. There was like 19 of us, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you consider other activities that go on, that was actually a pretty good turnout. Also, by promoting a sense of duty, sense of responsibility, that inspires youth. Again, this is something I've personally seen. In 2009, the Assembly of First Nations hosted they used a space at U of W to host their youth gathering, and I gave a speech that was inspired by Dr. Axworthy on the responsibility to protect and also other responsibilities. And when I was done my speech, the kids erupted in applause because for them it was like an Obama type saying, yes, we can, whereas normally they're told by the leaders that, no, we can't, it's the duty of the crown. And also, more recently, I gave a speech at this past summer at an event on addressing the problem of suicide. And again, I talked about duty and responsibility, and a young man from Shamattawa came to shake my hand to tell me that I inspired him and all his friends. I gave them hope, because again, no one ever tells them that they can do it. They're always told, no, you can't, because it's the government's responsibility. So think about that. In Shamattawa, where hope is so scarce, just telling them that they have a duty instead of rights, that they can do something to help themselves, it gave them hope. And so, what else was I going to say? So yeah, the reason I'm saying that here is because I had a pretty negative experience here at UW trying to promote. I'll admit there was a bit of fault in my approach. I admitted that part of my agenda was to take power from the chiefs and give power to the people, which was an approach not appreciated by some members of the university administration. And then I was threatened with being isolated from my peers and labeled a potential threat to student safety. But yet that happened 5 years ago, and here we are half a decade later, and I still haven't used violence. I'm still trying to use words. I'm still trying to engage in dialogue to inspire that sense of duty. And I just hope that for future generations, the University of Winnipeg does allow students to engage in political association, political activity, even if they are inspired by a need to bring an end to corruption in their communities. And that is a problem right now. Right as we speak, there's a group of people from Kanichihk who are speaking out against it. And in my community of Saugeen, it's a big issue. So but back to the main issue, yes, students need to have more freedom to talk about the things that matter to them, even if that it's about the problems in their own community, the problems with leadership. And that's all I've got to say. I've actually got to run because I don't know if you guys heard, but there was recently there's a protest in New Brunswick that recently turned violent. So there's a group of people who are meeting at the Manitoba Human Rights, the Canadian Museum of Human Rights to show solidarity. So if you will all excuse me, duty calls.
Well, Miigwech, I would say in my experience, there has been quite a lot of freedom for the students. Like if you looked at I Don't Know More this past winter, the University of Winnipeg's Aboriginal Student Council really took a leadership role in a lot of the events that were happening at Winnipeg. So I don't know your own experience, but I know that there has been, quite a lot of student organizing here in university, recently anyways. So other comments? Maybe, you got a mic already. How'd you do that?
Imagine that.
Yeah, good.
Sharon Conway, I'm the General Manager of Louis Riel Institute, which is the Culture and Education Authority for the MMF. I guess one of the things that I have done a lot of work in the last little while with all the post-secondary institutions, not just U of W, but we have a very good relationship. We do have a very good relationship with the U of W, and I think that's one of the greatest things that we can do in terms of student retention, because one of the things that I know having been to this university, I actually have an education degree from here, and but when I went to the U of W, I actually never admitted that I was Métis. I never actually admitted that I was Métis until I graduated. And part of that is because I didn't want other people to think that I was getting by on some freebie, that I was gonna work just as hard as everyone else to show them that I could do it. It wasn't until I became a teacher in the inner city, which is where I wanted to teach, that I started to identify, because I knew the little ones in front of me needed to know that they had a Métis teacher sitting in front of them. And now I've worked for the last however many years, working hard to be a role model and forging that road, as Diane was saying. We do that a lot lately. But I think one of the things that we don't do a good enough job of is, I don't know, fighting the racism that's out there that we know is alive and well. Because although it's great that we have 12% Aboriginal population, I think there are more than 12% here on campus. And I think part of that has to be our responsibility in terms of the community collaborating even stronger with the post-secondary institutions to say there is a benefit. As Leah was saying, we have $14 million in our endowment, and University of Winnipeg, I think, is our highest number of applicants for awards. So I know the university is doing a really good job, but I think all the post-secondary institutes need to work harder. And I think we as the community need to work hard to collaborate with them to show our students that, like for me when I went to school, there was a $500 bursary. If I would have known that admitting that I was Métis, I could have gotten more money, might have worked. So, I mean, I think we just need to do a better job. And when you were saying earlier about having Aboriginal schools and making kids feel they have identity earlier on, my grandchildren are going to Kanichihk, and when I asked them if they knew who their principal was, the principal of Kanichihk School is Rob Riel. They said, I said, Mr. Riel, and my granddaughter, who's 6 or 8, said to me, is he related to Louis Riel? I said, I think he is, my girl. And she said, you mean he's Métis like us? Yes, he is, my girl. So when your little ones are thinking that, as Leah said, we do a good job as leaders to instill identity and pride in who you are, but we can only do so much. We have to all collaborate and work together.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Sandy. I won't comment on your socks. I work with the Faculty of Education Access Programs, and I just want to comment on, there's been some discussion here about success stories. And in terms of, we have a program called Community-Based Aboriginal Teacher Education Program, and the intent of that program is to increase the representation of Aboriginal teachers in the school system. So it's a fairly new program. We've had 3 graduation groups so far, and it's kind of a small program, but there's 26 graduates to date. And it's we're sort of a close-knit community, if you call it that. And one of the things that's really positive about the program is the instructors say the students really bring not only their Aboriginal perspective, but their life experiences into lesson planning. And the quality of the lesson planning is really not only creative, but it really brings the connection and the engagement that some of you talked about to working with children. So as well, somebody else also mentioned about Aboriginal professors. We have, off the top of my head, I could name 4, and myself, master's degree. So yeah, we are starting to see more Aboriginal people in, higher level degrees. So I think it's really, it's a positive thing that I've seen since I've been here. So yeah, it's positive from what I've seen. Thanks.
Raven, can you pass the mic over there?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can I be heard? I'm pretty soft-spoken, so I'm going to try with the mic. But
Can you introduce yourself to us?
yes, I will. I'm Nawal Tashin. I'm Vice President of Student Services of the University of Winnipeg Students Association. I'd like to thank the people that decided to organize this, because these are important conversations to have on campus. I'd be interested in having a bigger panel where we can have other students involved and part of this discussion, because if we're going to be talking about retention and creating a sense of belonging on campus for students who identify as being Indigenous in Canada, then I think we need to take this conversation to a bigger audience. Also, in terms of my own personal experience coming to Canada in 2010 as an international student from Kenya, it was interesting coming to Winnipeg and seeing the inequality in society, and coming to the University of Winnipeg, living downtown, and just kind of seeing these different realities every day and not knowing what's going on, and having to go through my own personal process of learning about the history of this country, understanding the legacy of colonialism and how it's different in different parts of the world. And so it kind of relates back to what every speaker touched on in terms of really understanding what that history is and speaking about it openly in very constructive patterns and not always having awkward conversations. Like, I think we need to start breaking down those walls and just talk about the realities of Canada and the history of Canada and what that means. Sorry, another thing is I completely agree with indigenizing education and understanding different worldviews. And that relates back to the worldviews of people around the world, because if we're going to talk about westernization of education, that's something that has affected people throughout the histories in different parts of the world. And so for me, there's a sense of solidarity that I feel within as someone who identifies with color and culture and different faith backgrounds, that my educational experience has definitely been influenced by westernization, but that's not to paint a Western way of knowing as the wrong way, but just more collaborative pieces so that everyone can tell their own stories and celebrate their histories and celebrate their cultures and speak in their languages and not have this hierarchy of what is valued. But that was my little spiel. But I wish everyone the best, and the UWSA is always going to be supportive of Indigenous students, and we want to reach out more so, and Raven sits on our board, and we feel a connection. So yeah, thank you, Raven.
Miigwech. I think the Masters in Development program and the Masters in Indigenous Governance programs both do a good job of incorporating Indigenous methodologies globally into the coursework. So maybe more can be done at other programs and other departments to recognize and incorporate that. Are there other comments? I think, yeah, okay, I'll come over there with the mic. But one question I'll plant in everyone's head is, we've heard a lot about creating an inclusive environment, but I'm wondering, what is also on the other side of the equation? What does the Indigenous community have to do?
I can't answer that question. My name's Joel Marion. I'm with Menno Simons College. I don't speak for the college, but I do work there. I really appreciate the panelists coming here. And what I really appreciate is the concept of indigenizing education. And one of the challenges that I see from my perspective in a supportive role is, how do non-Indigenous people participate in indigenizing education, in navigating the challenges of seeing past false conceptions of monolithic identities. You know, we fall into the simple language of talking about Aboriginal peoples or Indigenous peoples, and non-Aboriginal people really need to kind of open up our minds and say, well, we're not talking about singular groups. We need to break that down. We need to be able to look at Aboriginal people and understand that there are many distinct identities. And I think there's also a really awkward approach for some people to not assume that everyone who self-identifies is necessarily a spokesperson for their culture. Is that fair to put on every Indigenous person, that you have a duty to represent or a duty to stand for a particular identity? Is that duty to yourself or to your community or to anyone else? But the gist of my question really goes back to, how do non-Aboriginal people navigate those elements of looking past the monolithic concept of identity and approaching Aboriginal people and saying, we really do want to integrate and indigenize the educational process. But how do we do that in a respectful way?
I just want to make a comment based on what you said about is it fair to expect every Indigenous person to stand up for their culture or explain their culture. It just brings to mind a comment that I made a few years ago. You know, I'm a Métis leader in Brandon, and we used to have a TV station there. We haven't had for a long time. Yes, I know, Jennifer worked there. Yeah. So almost every night on the supper news, there would be an incident downtown and somebody got hit with a stick or their purse was stolen. And again, you know, many, many times it was an Aboriginal person. And as an Aboriginal leader, and I'm sure as any other Aboriginal watching that news, you feel an instant feeling of, oh my God, not another one. Because everybody's judging me now, right? And every other Indigenous person in Brandon is being judged. And I think when you live under those kinds of circumstances, you start to feel like you have to defend who you are. And I had a conversation around a coffee table with non-Aboriginal people and said, you know, when you read the newspaper, when you read the Brandon Sun, and there's been an incident and it's been perpetrated by a white person, none of you feel guilty because you're not expected to feel guilty. The guilt is on that one individual. But when it's perpetrated by an Aboriginal person, we're all painted with the same brush. So I think some of it is circumstance that you're forced to feel like you have to defend who you are.
I just wanted to respond in regards to your question about how do you, as a kind of an educator or somebody in that responsibility, indigenize education. And I think that Menno Simons is taking the steps towards doing that. I know that last year I was involved in a circle, and it was for Indigenous students and anybody that wanted to be a part of that circle. And what we did is there was medicines there was eagle feathers there, and we talked about education at Menno Simons College and how we can work together. And I think that you're on the right track by including your students, because I think that if you want to know how to do that, then you need to ask your students, because we are where it's at. Yeah, and I just wanted to say that I know that you're planning to do that again, and I would just encourage you to advertise it more to the whole student body, so that there's a really great turnout. But also I think that it's important to, which I know that the university would be a good place to start, is trying to bridge that gap between the settler community and the Indigenous community, because there's a lot of miseducation when it comes to Indigenous people. And I think that we all have a role and a responsibility in changing the way that we think in Canada. And I think that university is a good place to start, whether that be some kind of cultural training for staff and students. I think that's another, opportunity there, because then we're learning about each other and we're sharing. And I had the opportunity to participate in a class called Adventures in Global Citizenship this summer at the University of Winnipeg. And I'll tell you, the class was so diverse. And one of the second day that we were in that class, we had a pipe ceremony at Kanichihk. And then we talked about colonization and oppression. And by the end of the day, we were all crying together because we had learned so much about each other, and we bridged that gap. And that feeling was so overwhelming that we were all crying together and we were laughing together. And I have to say that I truly learned more in that short period of time than I did through K to 12. And I think the majority of the students felt the same way. So I hope that answers your question.
Jennifer?
I'll be brief, but in terms of how to work with, how non-Indigenous people can work with Indigenous people to indigenize education, etc., I think there are a variety of ways, but quite simply there is an amazing group of leaders at the University of Winnipeg, for example, the Indigenous Advisory Circle. Diane and Leah and Raven are all on that circle, and there are others, Julie Pelletier, Dr. Jamie Cedro, etc. There are others. So all of the folks around the table are there to help, to support, to work with anybody who wants to work with us, and we actively reach out, obviously. But so we're there, we're available. We want to work with everybody because none of us has all of the knowledge, but all of us know somebody who does have the right knowledge for whatever particular area or question, etc. is there. So I know for myself, I'm very aware that my my culture, due to the residential school experience in my family, I don't have a lot of culture left in my family. So I know what I don't know, and I know where to go to get that. But I also can act as a bridge between the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal community because I do and have worked in both communities. So, everybody has their particular gifts that they can share and their particular piece that they can contribute. So I think all it takes is, as Raven said before she had to leave and go to class, is to get her baby, is to talk to students, talk to staff, talk to Indigenous faculty. We have an amazing number of Indigenous professors. Talk to the Indigenous Advisory Circle, because all of us, that's why we're here. We all want to help and we all want to support this institution and other institutions at the K-12 level, for instance, move forward together in a positive way. So thank you so much for that really awesome question.
And I think what some Indigenous academics would say is it starts with decolonizing yourself. And colonization, decolonization isn't necessarily just about having a colony, right? It's about power structures and relationships. So if you can approach the situation in a way that doesn't perpetuate the old power dynamics and inequalities of the past, if you can come forward in a respectful way and ask the right people and put yourself out there in a humble fashion, then I think that that's the good starting place, and moving forward from there. You approach the people that Jennifer talked to, or you talk to an elder, or you talk to the Treaty Relations Commission, who has an excellent speakers bureau, and you take it from there. So I think that's a good approach. So we probably have time for maybe one more exchange or comment. Who wants to wrap this up neatly in one thought? All right, Dr. Pelletier, right on. Quite apropos.
Yeah. Dangaglogil, Lewis Julie Pelletier, Najeo Listatuk Goyek, Weskat Sipu, Malasit Migma Metis. So I'm Julie Pelletier, and I'm chair of the Department of Indigenous Studies, and the fact that I was able to stay quiet this long, many of you know, is a miracle. Stop smiling and laughing so eagerly, you guys. But it is, thank you so much for being here, because the folks who organized this panel were sure that there might be 10 of us. 5 of us being, people who had to come. And so the interest and the passion that was shown here to me is incredibly heartening. Several of us have to run to another meeting at 4 o'clock, so I'll be very brief. The hope is there, right? The problems are not solved. We know that. If you listened to the throne speech yesterday, you know that the problems continue. Not only was there a reference to, the vacant land that was here when the settlers arrived, there was also several times repeated the term, our Aboriginals. Our Aboriginals. Our Aboriginals. The last time I checked, we don't belong to anybody but ourselves. And many of us believe that we also belong to the Creator, who I believe outranks Stephen Harper the last time I checked. So the colonial mentality continues, but there is an awful lot of work that has been done outside of that. The folks here have spoken again and again about Indigenous ways of knowing and other ways of knowing. Those of us who are working on the ground also find that there's a great deal of resistance to Indigenous ways of knowing. Those are considered not real. They're considered, superstition, religion, made-up stuff, and we get questioned about that a lot. I'm fully eager to answer respectful questions about what is Indigenous knowledge and what are Indigenous ways of knowing from a good critical thinking perspective, but from a knee-jerk resistance perspective, that's still there, and that just demonstrates continued resistance and colonial hegemonic thinking. So the fight isn't done, but a lot of battles have been won. And one of the reasons I know I came to this institution 3 years ago is because the institution was doing some really interesting things from the children, from the age of children, and Leah and others, and I talked about that earlier, all the way up to the graduate level. That's unusual. This can be a model. It's a model that I know I talk about when I go elsewhere, and it really gets people thinking. So that's really all I wanted to say, is that it is a shared responsibility and it's a shared problem, but they also can be shared victories. So miigwech.
Miigwech, Dr. Pelche. So, 140 years ago, October 3rd, Treaty 3 was signed on Northwest Angle, Lake of the Woods. And one of the chiefs at the negotiations leading up to that signing, he stood up and he told the Lieutenant Governor and the rest of the delegation, he said, "We will give you one of our children, and you should give us one of your children. Our child will learn how to live like you. Your child will learn how to live like us. And in that way, we will be able to live together on these lands." Right? Sadly, only half of that equation was fulfilled, as we know. However, I'd like to point out what was clear to this old Anishinaabe guy 140 years ago, which was that education would be key to this project of creating a nation out of two nations in these lands. And so we have spoken today about the role of education amongst Indigenous peoples, outcomes in the Indigenous community. But I would encourage you guys now, as we close this discussion and go about our days, to reflect on what happens on the other side of the treaty relationship. What role does education play in informing the rest of Canada? And what do Indigenous ways of knowing, Indigenous knowledge, and Indigenous methodologies have to share with the rest of the globe? So a good example of that will be Dr. Martin Brokenleg. He is a fantastic public speaker. He's a retired prof from UBC, and he's developed a wellness strategy called Circle of Courage, and he'll be sharing that on November 12th right here in Convocation Hall at University of Winnipeg. So staff, students, and community members, I'd encourage you guys to come out, because he's got a really solid wellness model and method of sharing it, but he's just a fantastic storyteller and public speaker in addition to that. So it's going to be an awesome event, November 12th. And it's in the morning, right?
I think it's in the afternoon.
Oh, it might be in the afternoon.
But I will check, and it will be emailed out.
Stay tuned for time. Okay, miigwech pijayek, everybody. Thanks everybody for coming, and miigwech pizindayek. Thanks for listening.